The mating surface for the oil pan is all cleaned up. Here goes the oil pan, showed you guys before. It's all cleaned up, looks brand new. And here goes our new gasket. So when it comes down to these type of gaskets, I like to use two different things: high-tack gasket sealant, and even this right here had pretty good results when I'm using a gasket like this and using a tack sealant. So you could say this essentially plays the same role as RTV, but not really, guys. The gasket's doing all the work, and this is really just to keep the gasket in place and to give it a little bit of extra insurance. I decided to put the gasket directly on the block first. I did not forget to put just a tiny bit of silicone between the block and the timing cover right there. You can see that. So here goes the gasket. I've already covered it in the high-tack stick. So let me go ahead and put that on. So I went to put the bolts on for the oil pan, and as I was like frantically putting them in, I noticed that they are just caked with silicone. And guys, I do not have the time to clean this up when I had already put the gasket on and the pan on. You know, you got to start clamping this stuff down before it starts to cure. Luckily, I keep a stash of brand new bolts here. I have plenty of them, so it's what I put on the oil pan. So the oil pan is all torqued down, but before I go flipping the engine back over again, I'm going to let it sit like this for just a couple of hours, because the same reason why I mentioned I didn't want to flip the engine over when I had just put the timing cover on, you know, wanting the silicone time to cure, is because look what happens when you move things. You see all that oil and assembly lube just dripping out. So when you start rotating the engine, all that stuff starts moving in places that it wasn't before. And I don't want to contaminate any of the adhesive or the silicone that I just put on. So the silicone on the timing cover is completely cured, but as you guys just saw, I did use like a high-tack paste for the oil pan gasket, and I want to give that some time to cure before I flip the engine back over, because I guarantee you all of that assembly lube and stuff is going to work its way right down into the oil pan and try to get out of that gasket. So give it time to cure. So this is the small elbow that goes to the water pump, and if you look inside of here, there is like surface rust inside of here. You probably see it at that angle. The best thing you can do for this is just let it sit in some evapor rust overnight, and tomorrow that part will be like brand new. So guys, here was the engine. Pretty much a fully assembled long block. All I have to do is grab the valve cover, grab the brand new gasket, put it on, and this thing's good to go, like the new chicken fajita from Taco Bell. Not a sponsor. It's just a bunch of little things I have to put on it now, you know, like the VTEC solenoid that goes right there, the oil filter, you know, little crap like that. I've already started installing sensors. You can see there goes the crank sensor, there goes the VTEC solenoid. I got this thing installed over here already where the strainer's at. So just a bunch of little things that I'm just trying to get wrapped up. All right, so it's the next day. Let's go ahead and pull this part out of here. And yeah, I can already tell that's a massive difference. It's nice and clean inside of there. Nice. So I just finished adjusting lash, and for the most part everything seemed spot on, but it's one of those things where even though the lash felt right on the intake and the exhaust, it's like if I didn't tweak it and make sure it was okay, I would always be second guessing myself. You get what I'm saying? So I went ahead and did all of the intake, all of the exhaust, using Drag Cartel's recommended specs, of course. So I was just following that. You can see I got my feeler gauges right here, and I got the tool for adjusting the lash, and everything was pretty much spot on, except for these two valves right here. They were a little bit on the tighter side. There were still some lash, don't get me wrong. They were not like rock hard up against the valves. There was still some lash, but when I went to put the feeler gauge inside of there, it was a little tight. And of course, one of these is the one that got the brand new valve, so it makes sense. But for the most part, the valve lash was not a issue. Everything seemed spot on. So I grabbed my valve cover. I was getting ready to clean it up so I could reinstall it. Of course, a brand new gasket. And I'm looking at the baffle here, and there's something that stands out to me, which is that right there. You see that indentation? that's not factory. Like, that is not part of the design of the baffle. And if we line it up, so this is where the phasers would be, the timing chain side. So it's going to be between cylinders 1 and 2. So it would be this row right here, and it would be on the back side. So that means this bolt right here was getting pressed into the baffle really hard, enough to dent it. But if the back one was getting pressed into the baffle, why wasn't the front one? You see what I mean? They're the same exact height. So that would be the back bolt that's pressed into the baffle. Clearly it's dented in. And over here there's not, but you know what? I think it's because of this relief. This relief might fall exactly right where the other bolt may be, and that's why we don't see anything. And you can see for between each and every cylinder, you see where these bolts are. The baffle has indentations for those bolts right there, but there is nothing right here. It's actually all the way over here. That's interesting. Now I am running the Skunk 2 low profile washers, which are going to be these standoffs. And guys, I don't like these things. These things leak like crazy. So I'm just going to get rid of these things and go back to original Honda grommets, and that way to be leak free. The problem is the original standoffs that go here, I don't know what I did with them. I probably threw them out, or they're just lost in the mess of stuff I got here. So I may have to buy some new ones. So I can't find the original standoffs that went on here, so I'm just gonna have to order a new set. Not a big deal. Once I get them in, of course I'm gonna install them, and what I'm planning on doing is putting a piece of clay right here on top of this bolt. I'll put the new gasket on the valve cover, obviously. We'll completely torque it down and then remove the valve cover, and I want to see what the gap is between this bolt and the baffle on the valve cover, if any. For now, as you can see, I do got the intake manifold gasket in place because it's time to put the intake manifold on, of course. And I just want to show you guys, this is the gasket that I was porting out last time. You can see how, is it perfect? No, but it's no longer obstructing the fuel injector. And that's all I was looking for. You're wondering why didn't I do a better job? Well, if you worked with this type, I don't know what this crap is made out of, but this stuff is like super durable, and it is hard to manipulate this thing. I came at it with my Dremel, grinder wheels, carbide bits, and even my soldering iron to try to melt the plastic away, and this thing just doesn't want to give, guys. It is some tough material. Guys, here's a tool I made a few years ago when I was first installing this intake manifold. It's a 13mm. I cut off this end, and this end over here got severely ground down. You can see how thin it is. So this tool was made specifically for this intake manifold, and it only comes out whenever this manifold has to go on or off. And if we come down here, you can see a perfect example. You see that nut right there? Well, this thing barely fits inside of here to get in there and just get little turns at a time. And you also got to consider, I don't even have the water neck installed right there, or the coolant hose that would pass underneath here going that way. So it would really get in the way of like these bolts or these nuts. And whenever this engine is in the car and everything's installed, it is 10 times more difficult to get this intake manifold off. But this tool really makes a difference. I was this close to buying these bolts online, guys. Like 6 of these bolts. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of these bolts on like an OEM website was gonna run me like $80. That's crazy. I decided, you know what? Let me come out here and look for these bolts, and sure enough, I did find them. I knew I had them laying around here somewhere. I didn't think I would find them, but I did. I knew I had them in a Tupperware, and here is where they were. You could see they're pretty rusty, but these are the ones that came off of a different cylinder head. But if push come to shove and I had to use these, I would use them no issues at all. I would just let them sit in some evapor rust overnight, and they would be all cleaned up and ready to use. And you gotta imagine, these things get covered in oil and they're sitting in oil all day inside the engine. So after you clean all the rust off of them with evapor rust, they would be 100% fine. But I happened to find the ones that came off of this cylinder head, and as you can see, they're all pretty clean. They match the rest of them. So that's all set. Saved me like $80 right there. And here goes the junk 2 parts. I could go ahead and throw these directly in the trash. And who knows, maybe I'm bashing Skunk 2 for nothing. Maybe I don't even have an official Skunk 2 product. It is very much possible that I bought fake knockoff parts online, not knowing that they were fake. And that's the issue, because I've heard a lot of complaints about that online of people getting fake parts. Anyway, that's all done with. We're going back to OEM, and we know that these style of grommets for the valve cover are actually going to seal. So now that this is all sorted out, you know, looking at this, I can't see how having the proper bolts on here is going to make a difference of where this valve cover sits. It shouldn't, if you think about it. So I would imagine if the baffle inside the valve cover was hitting this bolt, I would imagine it's still going to be hitting the bolt. As you can see, the inside of the valve cover is all cleaned up. Everything looks great. We got our brand new gasket installed. And I'm using my daughter's Play-Doh. This isn't the best stuff. We all know this is like that cheap stuff. And honestly, when you're doing stuff like this, you want that real good type of clay. You know what I mean? That expensive stuff. But let's see if this will get the trick done. You can see I put a little bit right there, right on top of the bolt. I'm going to try to not disturb it because we don't want it to fall off. But the whole idea is to see how much that Play-Doh squishes when we torque down the valve cover, so we get a sense of the gap that we have. There's just something that feels so good about going back to the OEM style washers and grommets, getting rid of these things that were there before, which leaked like crazy. All right, so let me go ahead and torque these down. And there we have it. They are all torqued down. I know it's not the proper nuts, but they're gonna have to do for now, but they are brand new nuts. Anyways, just to prove I'm not lying about any of this stuff, it all is torqued down. All right, moment of truth. The valve cover came off, and yeah, completely smashed in. You can see the indentations exactly where that bolt is. If you ask me, this little relief right here should have come down all the way over here, but you can see that's not the case. So as you can see, this baffle is held in. It's not held in with rivets, it's just held in like with some hex bolts. So I could easily go ahead, remove these bolts, and I'm gonna cut a hole right there to relieve that one spot where that bolt's gonna go. So this is not going as planned. These little cap head screws are in here stupid tight, and you know, even if you look past the silicone that's on them, I did not do that, by the way. It came like that right out the box. I guess they're really concerned with the bolts backing out and falling into the engine, which is a valid concern. I don't know if there's any thread locker also, but I tried to remove that one, stripped out. Tried to remove that one, also stripped out. And yes, I am using the correct size bit to remove them, and they are just in there stupid tight. Okay, so the deed is all done. You can see the hole that I drilled out. I actually drilled it out bigger than I need to because I want to make sure it completely clears the bolt. And guys, this is the same type of bolt that's in the cylinder head. There's just an old rusty one, but it's literally the same one out of a K series. And you can see how that whole bolt can go all the way through. So there is more than enough clearance for that bolt head. Now it should not be contacting the baffle anymore. You can see the screws or the bolts are back in place, and I went ahead and put a dab of Honda Bond on each of those bolts, just how it was right out the box, because if they put that silicone on there for a reason, I'm not going to be one to question it, and I sure as heck don't want one of those bolts to back out. Now, as you can see, I got 3 of those hex cap head bolts right here on the ground, and that's because these things are softer than butter. I stripped out 3 of them before I learned my lesson, and then I had to switch over to my pliers, which are made for extracting things like this that are stripped out, and it did a perfect job at removing the rest of them with the pliers, and I was able to torque them down just fine. But these 3 are damaged, so if I ever get some replacements, I'll put them back in here. But other than that, it's not a big deal. I left that one out in the center, and this one out in the center, and this one out on the end. Now, I did see another video specifically on this valve cover, and this top left hand one, they specifically say to leave it out if you're running really big cams on this car, because the cam lobe can actually come in contact with the head of this bolt. Yeah, that's scary. So that's why I got no problem leaving this one out. And guys, it's not gonna rattle. This shield is like solid inside of here with the rest of the bolts holding it down. It's really solid, so I'm not worried about it rattling or anything like that. That's pretty much it for the valve cover. I feel pretty confident that's no longer gonna come in contact with the bolt on the head. Let me go ahead and put that valve cover back on the engine. Of course, I have to put my Honda Bond in the little areas where it has to go, like right there, right here, and so on. as you can see, I went ahead and took the engine off of the stand over there and I put it on my engine cradle that I made myself. By the way, I do have a video of making this engine cradle. Anyway, I found a brand new original Honda O-ring for the oil cooler right here. Just found it in my spare parts. So I figure, you know what, every other gasket and O-ring on this engine got replaced, so why not replace this one? So it took like 5 minutes to put the brand new O-ring behind this thing. So that's all set. As you can see, the oil pressure sensor has been plumbed in, and I just got it zip tied right here and out of the way, because one lesson I learned is that it is way easier to install this right now rather than when the engine is inside the car. It kind of becomes a headache with space constraints. All right, so here's where things get a little bit interesting. You know, previously I said that the tuner was saying that the VTC actual wasn't matching desired. Basically, the computer is commanding that the engine gets to a certain VTC, which is like a degree of timing. And even though the computer is demanding it, the engine can't achieve what the computer is asking. So I decided to look into the VTC and the spool valve that I had on the car. And thankfully, I still had the boxes, even though I bought these years ago. So I was able to look up these part numbers, and yes guys, I know it's not OEM. I know there's a lot of hardcore Honda guys out there that say OEM or nothing, and I can agree with that to a certain extent. Okay, but these two parts from the dealer are $500. Come on now, you know, cut me some slack. Anyway, NTK, I've been using NTK parts for years, and like 99% of the time, no problems with them. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, so I went through my email, I looked up these parts, when I bought them, what year I bought them, and what vehicle I bought them. So I got them from Rock Auto, and I bought them for a 2004 Honda Accord, and now I'm just kicking myself in the head. I'm like, how did I make this stupid mistake, right? My block is out of a 2004 Honda Accord, but the cylinder head is out of a 04 Acura RSX Type S. Even though these parts go into the cylinder head, I ordered them for the 04 Accord, which is the block. And yeah, just really kicking myself in the head. So I'm like, this has to be why we're having oil pressure problems. This has to be why the VTC isn't you know, in its correct location, and it's throwing that code for it. So I look up the part numbers. This is for the VTC solenoid, the part that goes right here. So yeah, I ordered it for an Accord, but if you look up this part number also transfers over to the 04 Acura RSX base model. All right, and you're thinking, well, still you got a Type S head, so it's still the wrong part. No, not really, because if you go on Acura's website, you'll see that the VTC solenoid for the base model and the Type S is the same exact part. It does not change part number. So this is for an Accord, but this part number also transfers over to the base model RSX, and the base model RSX also uses the same part as the Type S. So in theory, even though I ordered it for the wrong car, in theory, this should be a part that functions and works, right? All right, here's the thing though. Here goes the original VTC that came out of the original head of this Accord engine when I had the complete engine, okay? You can see it has this distinct feature to it, right? Where you see the black lines, how they expand and get wider where the screens are. And same thing all the way across. It's a thin line, and then it gets wider so oil could go through. And it has a very distinct look, right? Well, the part that I got inside of this box is this one right here. Do you see how they're different? They don't look nothing alike, completely different design. And if you go on Rock Auto's website, no matter which name brand you choose, all of the solenoids for the Accord have this very distinct design and pattern to them, no matter what brand it is. Tell me why this one doesn't match. You get what I'm saying? On top of that, again, Rock Auto's website, if you look through all the brands, and even if you go back to NTK and type in their part number, they do not have a solenoid that looks like this. None of them come black, and none of them look like this, not for the Accord. They all look like this, and they don't come with a black housing. So I tried looking up this part number right here, and I don't even know if that's a part number because I can't find any information on this. But guys, this is the part, I guarantee you, this is the part that came in this box. I think this is a classic case of someone buying the part from Rock Auto, because keep in mind, these are expensive parts, guys. They're not cheap. What they do is they buy these expensive parts from Rock Auto, and then they'll go on like eBay or Amazon and buy the cheapest part possible from China, and then they swap out the packages, and then they'll return it back to Rock Auto, and essentially they got a high quality part for very little money. That makes sense? I think that's what's going on here. So I got screwed over from Rock Auto. I got a knockoff part that didn't really belong inside of this box. It's the only explanation I could come up with. Needless to say, since we're having these problems with oil pressure and VTC, I'm like, you know what? I got an RSX Type S head. I want to order the parts that are made for an Acura RSX Type S. So I ordered this part. Let's look at the differences, okay? I'm trying to line up where the O-ring, you see the O-ring at the base where it would seal. Let's try to line up the O-rings. And there are some differences on where these ports land. It's not by a lot. It's very slight, but these things are in slightly like different locations. You could see they're offset by a hair. And if you look inside of here, guys, there are ports inside of there so that oil can pass through. There's some on the top, some on the bottom. Hopefully you can see them. So it's very important that these ports are in the correct location. Another thing I noticed is, look at the hole that's milled into the base right here of the metal. You can see its size, right? It's not that large of an opening. Now let's go over to the solenoid that's made for the RSX Type S. That opening is massive compared to this one. So there are some differences. That's the VTC actuator. I got an actual part for an RSX Type S. Okay, that's what we're gonna run with. As far as the spool valve, so this is the part number for the spool valve. This is the part that came in the box, but I had the junk 2 part. You know, guys, I'm not gonna talk crap. Okay, anyway, so I had the skunk 2 part, basically a bling bling piece, right, to dress up your engine and make it look nice. So all I did was I took off this part that came on this spool valve and I just transferred it over, and this is the one I was running. And if you look on Skunk 2's website, it says that this spool valve is functional with the RSX Type S head. Now here's the thing, if I didn't have this oil pressure problem and VTC problem, I wouldn't be questioning any of this stuff and I would just run it because I'm like, it functions, it's fine, right? But the fact that I am having these problems, I'm not taking a chance. Replace the stuff, you get what I'm saying? So some of you may have noticed I have a brand new spool valve right there, specifically made for the Acura RSX Type S. And here's one thing else I got to touch base on. I said that the VTC actuator, the part number did transfer over from the Accord to the RSX, right? In theory, you should be able to use them and they should work. But as far as the spool valve, from the Accord to the RSX, they are not the same part number. In fact, the spool valve for the base RSX is not even the same spool valve that's made for the Type S head. The Type S head and the TSX have a very specific spool valve. Yeah, that's interesting. I just found that out. So that's what this is right here. And it only works on 2 vehicles, the Type S RSX and the TSX. So that tells you how specific this spool valve is. It cost me another few $100s just to get a Type S spool valve and a Type S VTC actuator. But this is where we're at, guys. When you're chasing a problem like this, you cannot leave no stone unturned. To be honest with you guys, just me tearing apart this engine and replacing all the gaskets and the timing chain and everything else I showed you guys that I replaced while I'm in here, I'm like maybe like $700 in. It's crazy, but that's the reality of this type of stuff. So at this point, I've only dropped the first video asking you guys, you know, what did you think of the noise, or you have any experience with this? And I got a ton of comments. So many people just dropping knowledge left and right. And I really appreciate that stuff, guys, because, you know, sometimes stuff like this, it's just hard to do it by yourself. And this is where a community really comes in and helps you, gives you advice. And I appreciate it so much. So someone was telling me that they've heard this noise before and they've kind of dealt with it, or a friend dealt with this type of noise. Basically, they had a shop tear down the whole engine because of a very similar noise. They didn't find anything. They put the engine back together and the car or the engine was still making the same exact noise. It wasn't until after they replaced the VTC solenoid or actuator that the problem actually went away. The noise went away. So that's promising, right? That's great news to hear. And someone else, yeah, I think it was someone else, left a comment saying that Haltech's software inside their ECU is what's causing this VTC problem. That apparently there's a glitch in their latest software, and that's the software I'm running, the latest one, that's causing this VTC to say that it's not reading correctly. So what he suggested was, once the engine gets put back in the car, you know, everything plugged in, start up the engine. If the noise is still there and the engine is still running and idling like crap, to simply unplug the VTC solenoid, and that the noise should go away and that the engine should idle and run decent, because the problem is in fact inside the Haltech software. You know, whether it's a physical problem with the old solenoid that was in here or it's a software issue, I just feel so grateful right now because I feel like there's a ton of weight lifted off of my shoulders. I feel way more confident that this engine's gonna run and run beautifully once it's inside the car again. And I feel so relieved. You get what I'm saying? Because there's nothing worse than spending all your time and money to tear something apart and not find anything. Granted, this all wasn't for nothing. This whole issue with the spray paint inside the engine and just getting everywhere and clogging the oil pickup, that could have led, like later down the road, could have led to a catastrophic failure. You get what I'm saying? So I'm actually very happy that I was forced to take the engine back apart again, and we found what we found. But do I want to keep doing this? Hell no. Someone was asking me what the spark plugs look like, and here they go right here. I don't see anything wrong with them. Everything looks pretty normal, no damage to them at all. If anything, you could say they're running rich. So besides being a little dirty, I don't see an issue. Some people ask me about the throwout bearing, that possibly could be making noise. And guys, this throwout bearing is brand spanking new. Again, just like everything else on the engine, it doesn't even have like 30 minutes of runtime. It's a brand new throwout bearing. So, you know, everything moves freely, no issues at all. As you can see, I got the transmission mated back up to the engine. And if there's one thing I hate, it's taking the transmission off of this thing. If there's one thing I hate even more, it's putting a transmission back on it. It's such a nightmare trying to align everything and get it to go on. With two people, sure, okay, not that big of an issue. But when you're doing it by yourself, trying to align everything and just the pure weight of the transmission is an absolute nightmare. What I found that actually helped this time was I found two bolts that are the same thread pitch as the ones that go into the block right here. As you can see, I cut the heads off and I just threaded them into the block like this, and basically use these as alignment dowels so that the transmission can go on more or less straight, and then you just kind of wiggle it and move it around and get everything to line up. So this little idea really did help me a lot, but again, still a nightmare to get this transmission on. You know, one thing that's been bothering me about the engine cradle, and guys, I made this cradle, I do have a video on it if you want to watch that. Well, when I designed this engine cradle, I never took into account the transmission being mounted to the block. So because of that, you could see how I blocked that hole right there where there's a bolt that's supposed to go into the transmission. I also blocked this hole down here, the same thing. And I also blocked the path right here for the mid shaft to come out of the transmission and where it bolts up to the block right here. So just 3 problems, and it's all because this one arm is in the way. So I think I want to go ahead and redesign this while I can, and with the engine sitting on the stand is probably the easiest way to do it. All I have to do is support the transmission like right here in this corner with a floor jack, and I could take this bolt out. I'll cut this off, and I think I'm gonna end up going up to this bolt hole up here. It seems like this one isn't used for anything, so I could go to this one right here and make sure I come out far enough to clear these 2 holes and to clear the mid shaft that goes into the transmission. You know, some of you could say it's not that big of an issue, but the thing is, since I can't put these bolts in right now or the mid shaft, I have to do it once the engine is like dangling from the engine hoist, and it's not fun when you got an engine dangling back and forth. Number one, that type of stuff scares me because you're like, when is something gonna break, and the engine just comes crashing down, right? So I try to minimize the amount of time that this engine is just hanging on a hoist like that. Alright, so I'm pretty much done modifying the cradle here. You can see I cut off the piece that was here previously and I welded in this arm. It has a bend right there and it comes up to the point that I pointed out before. And what I did was I put the 2 bolts in, the ones I was talking about earlier, and I also installed the shaft before I made this arm right here. So basically I know what I have to work around. I hope that makes sense. And there's definitely enough clearance to get that shaft in and out of there. No issues at all. And I just use from here to try to triangulate this thing and make it strong. I don't have it like every piece like fully welded all the way around, only because of access, but it's definitely strong enough to hold up the engine. At least I think it is. And then once I take the engine off of this, I'll come back in and fully weld everything. The floor jack is still holding up the engine right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and release it and we should not have any issues. There we go. No problems at all. So the cradle's all done. Everything looks good. Next thing I want to move on to is draining the fluid out of the transmission, because, you know, people are spitting out ideas on what this noise could be. And I told you guys before how I changed the spool valve and the VTC solenoid and the comments I was getting about it. So I feel pretty good about that being the actual fix. And I got my fingers crossed on this one, guys. I just feel like 98% sure that that's going to fix the issue. But I don't want to rule out, you know, the ideas of this noise coming from inside the transmission, because it did cross my mind as well. So I did buy this thing off of eBay, sight unseen basically, and this thing sat for a few years with no fluid in it until I recently put brand new Honda fluid in it before our first test drive. Granted, during my 2 test drives, the transmission seemed to shift perfectly fine. I didn't hear any weird noises come from this thing. I didn't feel like any grinding gears or nothing at all. So when I drain this fluid out, I'm expecting to see dirty fluid, because like I said, it sat for years with no fluid in it. So as long as no chunks of metal come out, I'm perfectly happy. If the fluid comes out dirty, I'm fully expecting that. So I cracked the drain plug free. As you can see, I got a clean container right here to catch the fluid that comes out. Oh, it's queefing, guys. Oh. I thought it was just gonna shoot out like oil does. So if I remember correctly, this fluid had like a very light blue tint to it, and you could see how it's looking. I don't know what that color is, like a brown, which I'm not surprised, because like I said, this transmission shat it did not shat. Okay, this transmission sat for a while with no fluid in it. You know, I'm sure some rust developed inside of there on the gears and whatnot, so the fluid kind of acts like a cleaning agent. But the really good news is no metals coming out, no chunks of anything, it's just fluid. Check out my funnel right here with a clear tube. You can see I got it going into the fill port. Here goes the transmission fluid. So we're just gonna go ahead and keep adding the new fluid until it starts to come or drip out of the fill port right there. And I got a clear tube so you can see the color. Oh, this thing is not blue. I thought it was like a light blue. Maybe I was just thinking of something else. It almost has like a, I don't know, maybe like a slight purple or slight pinkish tone to it. But clearly this fluid looks different from the stuff that came out, so you could tell how the fluid is cleaning the transmission out. Anyway, let me go ahead and finish topping this off. So in my first video that I dropped, a lot of people are saying that the reason why I got so much like excess pressure buildup and these oil leaks are starting to develop is because I got rid of my PCV, which used to be right there, and you can see now I have it pretty much plugged off. Well, this thing used to stick out much further this way and much further this way. As you can see, I chopped it off, put tabs in it, put the plug in it in order to fit the intake manifold because it was interfering with it. People are saying I need a PCV. Well, who am I to say that they're wrong, right? Obviously, there's PCV systems on a car for a reason, but the thing is, my valve cover has breather ports. You can see an aftermarket valve cover, so it's got some on the front. It has 2 more on the rear of the valve cover, and to me, that would be just as good as venting at the PCV. Because if you know anything about this PCV, so I showed you guys the inside of this housing right here. You can see it's just like a cavity that works its way around and it dumps into the inside of the timing cover. Well, the inside of the timing cover is also the inside of the valve cover. So essentially it's the same thing, guys. Basically, if I were to grab my smoke machine and pump smoke into this port or any of the ports right here on the valve cover, that smoke that I pump into the system is eventually going to work its way out of the PCV port because it's all one system, if that makes any sense. So what does it matter if I vent the system right there or if I vent at the valve cover? You get what I'm saying? But here's the thing, I'm the one asking for help. I'm the one putting out the videos asking for people's opinion and help, and when they give it, who am I to just say no, you're wrong? You get what I'm saying? I'm asking for help, so I should accept that help. Do I need an actual PCV? I don't think so. But do I need a way to vent the pressure? Yes, I do. I wasn't doing that before. That was my problem. I had all of the caps on here plugging off the valve cover. I had this cap over here plugged. So basically, yes, the whole system was sealed, which was my mistake. But I can fix this by venting up here at any one of these ports on the valve cover. It doesn't have to be a PCV right here, if that makes any sense, guys. But because like I said, I'm the one asking for help, so who am I to deny people and the help that they are giving me? So I will accept it. I went out and bought a brand new PCV. Now of course I can't go ahead and fit it in its factory location. First of all, the threads inside of there are different. It's not going to fit anymore. But you can see, even if I tried, it's going to hit the intake manifold. It's the reason why I cut it off in the first place. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this entire housing. Not a big deal. Okay, so now we can get a better look at this thing. You can see where the original PCV port is, that tunnel right there, which leads to this thing. So we want to drill a new hole for the PCV, but we can't interfere with any of the holes that are made for bolting this thing onto the engine. So like this one or this one, and you know, stuff like that. And ideally you want the port to be as high as possible. It's why Honda put the original port pretty much at the highest point. So you know, an option here is we could grind this top piece flat up here and drill into here and somehow do something like that. You get what I'm saying? The problem with that is there is like a ball inside of here, like a check valve. Not a check valve, I don't know, maybe it is a check valve, but it's just like some sort of a restrictor. The thing I noticed is if I were to put this upright like this and I blow air into the bottom right here, yes, giving it the classic BJ, it is more difficult to push air through it rather than when it's sitting horizontally like this, just how it is. I would imagine there's a reason why Honda put it in at a horizontal position instead of vertical. So if I blow air through it when it's standing upright like this, I could feel that it requires more pressure to get past that ball inside of there. Whereas when it's sideways, it's a lot easier to blow through this thing. And obviously we don't want to create a restriction, or we don't want to make the engine have to work harder just to breathe. So ideally, I want to find a way to install this in the horizontal position. Now we could come out the side like this. The problem with this is now this is underneath the intake manifold, and it just makes it really difficult to get to and get access to this thing, and it starts to cram up the space. Also with the thermostat sitting right here, that hose is going to go up. So basically if I put it right here, it's not going to work. It's going to be hitting the coolant hose that's going to come up from the side of this housing, so that doesn't really work. The only option, guys, that I'm really seeing here, well, there's two options. Number one is we just straight up put the PCV right here. Obviously the downside to this is it isn't the highest point, but you can see we would come right in through there. I don't know how much it really matters to be at the highest point, guys. Remember, this isn't even the highest point of the whole system. Technically the highest point of the PCV system is our valve cover. So does it really matter if we get this valve at the highest point possible, or if we get it down here? You get what I'm saying? I'm not sure it matters. But another option is, if we really want to push to get it as high as possible, is to try to get it to come through right here in this cavity. So it's maybe like an inch lower than the factory one, but it would come through there. And we would have to grind off some of this webbing right here, make a flat spot and drill in. And the deed is done. As you can see, I did go in right there. Now I know this looks like a mess, but I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up and make it look a little bit neater. So it went through. The one thing I did not think about was the wall thickness. You can see we don't got many threads to work with, guys. That's probably like 2 or 3 threads at best. So drilling this hole, you want to use a 1/2" drill bit because the thread pitch for the PCV is a M14 by 1.5. So after I drilled it with a 1/2" drill bit, I went ahead and tapped it. And of course, I'm putting a crush washer on it only to take up the gap right here. You can see it right at the base of this thing. The threads pretty much stop, right? And since we have such little thread engagement here, I'm using the washer, this is just like a standard crush washer for a oil drain plug. So I'm using the crush washer to take up that space right there where there is no threads, and we get the maximum amount of thread engagement. I hope that makes sense. So anyways, this threads in nicely. So I got my torque wrench set to what most Honda 10mm bolts get torqued down to, which isn't much. But if it could be torqued down at least somewhat, I'll be happy with it. So there it goes, click. Now you also got to keep in mind, I know some of you are saying right now, that's not going to seal. Of course it's not going to seal. There's not enough thread engagement here. So my plan is to put Honda Bond on the threads. So that's going to do all the sealing, guys. I'm not expecting the threads to seal. I hope that makes sense. The silicone is going to seal this thing and it'll be good. I just want to make sure that I could torque it down with the torque wrench, meaning that it's not going to back itself out. That's the only reason for torquing it, is that it won't back itself out all by itself, that there is enough thread engagement to at least hold the PCV in place. So with it fully torqued down, that's going to be its final resting place, and I'll show you the back side. There it goes right there. As you can see, looks really clean. And it definitely doesn't stick out too far, meaning it's, we got plenty of space. You can see it is pushed back quite a bit. And guys, I think that's about as good as it's going to get for installing a PCV in the system. So basically, it was either install the PCV right here or just run without it. And the fact that, I'm hearing so many comments about you need a PCV, I think everyone can agree that this is my best option. As you can see, I got everything reinstalled. Water pump housing, the water pump, thermostat housing, intake manifold, and everything has been torqued down and good to go. I just got to pop the alternator on it with the belt and this thing will be all set. But you can see the new location of our PCV, and I think it looks pretty good and it shouldn't get in the way of anything. We should have pretty good access to it. It's one of those things where I wish I had a little bit more thread engagement, but at 3 threads, like I said, I was able to torque it down to like 108 inch-pounds, which is roughly like 9 foot-pounds. And this is definitely one of those things where you don't want to just go at it by feel and be like, oh, I could just, snug it with my hand. No, you're going to pull the threads. So I got to remind myself that if I'm ever changing the PCV, number 1, put a little bit of Honda Bond on the threads to make sure it seals. And number 2, use a torque wrench at 108 inch-pounds and it should be all set. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. I think it was worth the effort, and it's time to put a fork in her because she's done. I did pick up a new tool, which is this thing right here. This is for locking the camshafts right here on the back of the engine whenever you're trying to set timing, or if you're going to replace the timing chain and you don't want things to move. You get what I'm saying? So I wasn't able to use it this time. I did buy it late, but it's nice to have the tool and it didn't cost a lot. Okay guys, I gotta clean up my mess right here on the ground, but honestly I can't think of anything else that I'm missing. I say she's ready to go back into the car.